reason that when I came out of Christianity, I did not feel safe to test things was because I didn't have trust in myself because I had been taught to separate from myself, right? It was like, trust God, trust God, trust God. God will tell you, okay, cool. Well, when God's gone, then what? Right? God, right? So it's like, how do we, inside or outside of Christianity, like, again, no judgment, do your thing if you're inside Christianity. And how do you cultivate enough self-trust to be able to discern, right? Like, if we're always giving our power away to someone else, something else, how do we actually embody anything? That's what comes to mind. It's like, it makes so much sense that people who are deconstructing and coming into the world are just like in freeze because they don't know how to process or engage with anything with self-confidence and self-trust.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am with my friend Taren, and I think we have something really special to talk to you today about. I'm very excited for this conversation because we both have very similar backstories. We're on a similar journey, and we're both interested in very similar things. So, Taren, would you please kind of introduce yourself and tell people very briefly what you're doing, what you do, what you're interested in, and we'll start from there.
Sounds great. Hi, everybody. Excited to be here. So what do I do? Currently, I am working as a practitioner of somatic trauma and attachment therapy. I'm also in school on track to be a therapist, licensed therapist. So in the process there, I would say kind of my main focus with the work that I do is helping people move through, heal through difficult experiences in their life, be it trauma or, religious deconstruction, which we have a little bit of experience with, um, and and kind of come out the other side with what I guess I would call a story that serves them, right?
Yeah. And how long have you been doing that? How long have you been kind of in that vein of work or practice?
Um, I started this in 2001, I believe, so a handful of years here. And it honestly happened because I experienced somatic facilitation, healing, whatever you want to call it. And it changed my life. I think I realized I had already sort of started deconstructing my faith previous to that. And I think
Wait,
I real
2001 or 2021?
21, sorry, did I
Oh.
say one?
When
It's
I
been
was 10,
forever.
I was very opened up at a young age with
Yes,
my traumatic trauma.
graduation of high school. No, sorry, yeah,
No,
21. So it's roughly 4 years.
okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. I don't remember what I was saying, but that's it.
Sorry.
It's been a handful of years. It's okay.
Yeah, and I remember when we met in Vegas, and during that time, you were part of, well, I don't know what you were doing at that time. I remember we met we briefly met, and then we've stayed in touch, through social medias over the years, and I think we've seen kind of the co-evolution of our journeys kinda take similar trajectories coming out of maybe an evangelical space into this, psychosomatic therapeutic, space. To give the backstory of that, let's start there so that way people kinda can have a little bit of a understanding as to what that history is and then that transition.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're asking about my history with, Christianity?
Just briefly, like, we'll get into it. We'll definitely get into it, but just for, like, kind of like a generic overview.
Totally. Um, yeah, so I was introduced to Christianity very briefly and, like, few and far between. My mom sent me to, like, a Christian summer camp every year for years, and that was kind of my only exposure to it. But when I met you, I was sort of in the middle of, like, I had found it for myself, right? I had chosen it for myself. I had dedicated my life to it. And so that's kind of where we met, was in the midst of that. Yeah, it was like it was my life. It was everything, you know? I had made it my like life's purpose to give myself to that. Yeah.
So let's jump straight in because the thing that I think I'm most curious about is the moment. Maybe I'm sure it was several moments, but I think we all have these kind of, I don't know, maybe like aha epiphany type, or this deep knowing of like, I think there might be something else, or there's another path, or I don't fit, you know? And
Mm.
I don't know, maybe for some people that happens sooner than later, like, and then they stay involved for a while, or they have a drastic change and they're like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore, or we all approach it differently. But I do feel like there's either a thought or a feeling or a circumstance that usually occurs where people start to kind of get this sense of curiosity or whatever it might be towards something else outside of the container of modern evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, totally. I would say, like, for me, I feel like when I reflect back now, I'm like, "Oh, there were so many moments where I had the sort of awareness that I was questioning something," but what I now know is that I stayed in that for safety, right? Like, I needed stability and community and support and, like, structures, that showed me that life could be different than what I grew up with, and that was more important, and therefore prioritized over, the questions that I was having, or the, like, sort of discomfort or cognitive dissonance or whatever you wanna call it, right? But I can remember, yeah, all the way back to the start, having moments of being like, "I don't know if I believe that," like, be it any of the hot topics of Christianity,
Sure.
really,
Yeah.
um, you know? And I didn't really have, something I'm still, I guess, trying to, like, I'm working towards, like, reclaiming, is being, like, confident enough to be like, "No, I don't believe that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to throw the baby out with the bathwater," right? Like, I
Yeah.
was very much, like, adjusting myself to stay within the safety and comfort of that structure, you know? But I I think I've always sort of been, like, I've always leaned towards the magical, like, the start. And I think that's why I loved Christianity. Like, I loved the Holy Spirit, I loved prayer, I loved all of that stuff, worship, because it gives that same sort of feeling, of, like, interconnectedness that, like, fast forward to now, I find with nature and all of these other things, but
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I mean, similarly for me, I grew up around Christianity, but not in it necessarily. Like never understanding it. It was a cultural thing. And I remember when I graduated from college, I had these moments of like I couldn't explain them, and but it was like a numinous calling. There was a voice. There was this knowing. There was a thing that I'm like, I'm supposed to go do this. Which for me, it was give away all my possessions, get a one-way bus ticket to New York, and get dropped off in the middle of Chinatown. Uh, this, your run-of-the-mill everyday stuff, but I knew that was what I was supposed to do, and I didn't know why, but I knew there was something, and I knew it was connected to the divine, and I didn't really know how to relate to that. But because I had the only framework I had for anything of religious or a divinity or any type of connection to something like a God figure was through the lens of Christianity. So naturally, I turned to the Bible. And what's funny is when you start reading just the Bible, like if you're somebody that's a mystical type person or someone that's just kind of like you said, you love magic, you're open to this stuff. You read some of the stories in the Bible, and I think what's gonna jump out at you is the crazy, miraculous Jesus that's walking around doing all of this stuff that's like, "This is crazy." Like, is this and so, for me, it just led me on this quest of like, well, what would it look like to try and live like that or to see if that stuff's existing, and I feel like not starting that journey not in the church and then just traveling around the country and getting involved with churches because I'm like, well, surely they're the same. they have the same mindset of wanting to see that magic, and then you get into it and you realize you're like, "Wait, this is like, this is not what you guys are really wanting to look at or wanting to do," and then you just see "What what am I missing something?" And I just felt like it was, slowly draining the magic out or reframing the magic as "Hey, it's magic, but it's not wild. It's not uncontainable. It's not mysterious. It's not uncontrollable. It's a version that is maybe created." So I'm curious if you can think back those spaces in which you started to question, you started to be like, "I don't know if I believe this." What was your ability with the people around you to vocalize that? Like, what did those relationships look like? Where you're like, "Hey," maybe to a fellow churchgoer or somebody that you were close with or somebody that you were, in community with. Do you remember what those conversations felt like? What they were like? How they if you had people around you that were like,
Yeah, I think, the majority of, like, when I think about my time in Christianity, I would say is probably in connection to YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission. So, it was like the beautiful thing about that space is that there was so many people from so many different places, right? And so you had while you had sort of the mainstream Christianity thing happening, right? You also had access to people who I felt like were like me, who were kind of a little bit side of what we were like, quote unquote, supposed to be, right? People who were like, I don't know, like, I love magic. I love, loving people without boundaries and whatnot. And, something I want to touch on just briefly about what you were talking about is like, you said, like, taking the wildness out of the magic, and, like, that is like, when you come back to a masculine god, like, this idea of a masculine god, that is the masculine ideal, right? A container, structure, right? Containment. That is the masculine energy. So when you have Christianity that's all about this masculine ideal, you lose all of those feminine traits, right? That energy of the feminine, that sort of uncontained, abstract, like that, the expansiveness, right? And that's just, I feel like it's so important to name it and be like, oh, that's what was missing, right? And, again, fast forward, like eventually why I left, but I think there was people along the way who also felt the same way. Like, I remember we were in Hawaii, and 4 of my friends and I, like, on one of our days off, we, like, all painted our faces and just went, like, out in the woods, and we're, like, howling at the sky and, like, running through the woods, and, like, hiking without, like, direction, right? And we
"Yeah,
got to the top and we just, like, told stories to each other, and it was, like, this very primal thing that we were doing, but, like, nobody else really understood it, or it felt that way at least. It was like, "Oh, there's those people," and then there's us doing the, like, good work. And I think, like, the most interesting thing to me now is when I think back on that time and when I look at the people who I'm still connected with, those and the people who have deconstructed, they're all the same people, right? The people that I felt like understood me and got me and, like, really loved me outside of like, are you doing the right thing? Do you look the right way? Are you still a believer? Whatever it is, those are the people that I'm still connected with, and most of them have left the church, which
yeah,
is interesting.
yeah." As with what you were saying too about the feminine, I think that's something that I think Jung has. I think his insights on the Trinity and the lack of the Quaternity is I think is so evident. Like, you see it playing out as what you're talking about because and you mentioned something the last time we talked when you were talking about not finding any feminine archetypes that you related to or any I mean, yeah, that you related to, right? There's feminine archetypes, but, they're they're scarce and there's not as many, right? And also the idea of taking out, like, not being able to wrestle with evil. Like, I think for the most part, Christianity just does not know how to handle the polarity of dark, like the darkness and the feminine. And it's like you take both of those things out at kind of like the micro, like the practical level of existence, and then also like kind of maybe a layered ontology of like spirituality of having, where I would say that those two aspects of not having that as a part of something that you're actively participating in, like that you're ritualizing, that you're aware of, is going to create what we're talking about. It's going to create this like sterilized, contained environment in which you then start to do these really funny things in which like you kind of create the illusion of that wildness or that mystery or that feeling where it doesn't actually it's not actually there, right? Because at the root, at the fundamental, you don't have it. You've taken it out. Like you've taken out the Dionysian factor from Jesus. Like you've taken him out of the wild. You've made him into the sterilized figure that is quite frankly, it's like, I don't know if it's anything that is actually even scriptural, right? Like I don't think that I think it's an interpretation, but I think you could look at it and really make a good case as to like this guy was a lot different than I think that we're making him out to be. So that's why it's like I see the necessity for expanding into this conversation, into this type of work because um that type of suppression, that type of avoidance, that lack of ritualization within the framework, I think has led to a lot of what we're seeing today and causing people to deconstruct. And maybe you can like riff on that in a way that kind of like brings it down or adds a layer to it to help people kind of understand what we're talking about. Cause I know that might for some people come across as like, what? Like, I don't understand it. But
Yeah.
I think,
I mean,
you know,
are you talking in reference to like masculine and feminine? Is that what
yeah,
you're meaning?
kind of having that polarity and but also like the lack of it within the Trinitarian. Because the way I look at it is like, well, okay, if you have Trinitarian framework, like that's good, and that is a part of creation, and that is a directive force that needs to happen, but it's not the entirety of the experience because we need the quaternity, we need the feminine, right? Like we need those qualities embodied if we're going to be authentic to like like what's going on inside of us as far as like balancing of the opposites.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think a really easy way to sort of explain that whole experience is the way that I understand it is sort of like the masculine transcends and the feminine embodies, right? And when we lack the embodiment aspect, we're always going to be transcending things, right? Up and out of things. We're trying to get above it, get perspective, which is good. It's not a bad thing, right? Like this is that whole to me, that sort of idea of like looking towards heaven, right? What's coming next, right? How do I live my life here so that I can do the next thing? And it's like, okay, that's great. And also, like, we're here in this human body for a reason, experiencing emotions and pain and excitement and happiness and joy, right? So, like, how do we balance those things? And this may not be answering your question, but it's something that I've been pondering is like, I think oftentimes we want to have these conversations within the context of Christianity of being like, how do we preserve Christianity as something that is valuable and um yeah, valuable, right? And also, like, I think for me, I'm starting to get to a point where it's like there are things in Christianity that are valuable, right? And I think religious belief in something other than ourselves is valuable to our psyche. And also, like, I really get hung up on this like masculine God ideal, right? Just having the masculine as the symbol of divinity, I think is quite damaging to be frank, especially for women, right? So, I don't know if
Yeah.
I answered your question there, but that's
No,
sort
I
of where
think
it
we're
came.
circle. I no, I no, I think that's good. I think we're circling what we're talking. The impetus here because it's almost like the way I look at it is, and again, going back to the quaternity of a lot of what Jung talked about is this idea of if you're going to build anything, is like you're going to have this four sides represents the whole, right? And in order to have um you know, that feminine energy, because if it's like you have to have Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the woman, right? Like, where is the woman? Like, where you have the Son, you have the Father, you have like you have all of these masculine energies floating around, um, but it's not represented, and so at that point, you have this you have this component of what you're talking about where it's like, yes, like that is a useful orientation, which I look at it as like, yes, this orients ourselves to, it's like inhale exhale type of situation where it's like when you're positioning your like when you're in, for example, when you're working with people with trauma, um, a lot of those people are looking for some type of stability, right? They're looking for some type of like place to land and way to find like a stable force as to like, okay, here I am. And in those cases, I look at it as like a Trinitarian approach of like finding that structure is good and it's great. But when it becomes inflated, you miss out on that the soul. Like you miss out on the embodiment of like, well, what is the point? The point of this is to stretch out, to grow your roots deep, to stretch out to different places and to allow that spirit soul connection in which it goes into the earth. And like the way I see it now, it's very tantric. It's like we transcend, like the gods are above us, but they embody our souls. They embody who we are. They spread out into the land and they give life the sensations and the textures and the richness and all of that. And when I hear feminine and I hear even like shadow, because I think that's another thing that's been cut out. I think that those two places are conduits of soul. Like they are the enrichedness of our souls, and I feel like when you cut this out, you get this flattened idea of a spirit that looks
Hmm.
like this one thing that a group of people have decided, like, oh, this is what it looks like. And it's like often masculine. And because it's, it has, it's often looks like stuff that benefits, a certain group of people. You're like, well, where's the diversity? Where's the richness? Where's the inclusion? And that's not to say there's not diversity within organized religions. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just uh, as far as the experience of being alive, like what you were saying, it's like there's something in you that's like I want to go out in the woods. I want to like feel the dirt in my toes. I want to have the moon on my face and have it reflected off the paint. Like that's a texture. That's a vibrancy and aliveness that I think the church kinda glosses over that because fundamentally it's like, well, the earth is not your home, or like, this is just a test, or it's a cosmic like, you know what I mean? Like, there's, like, all these ideas thrown in there that subtly influence people that or shape us, and subtly shape us into the way we view it.
100%. Man, I have so many thoughts by everything you just said. Like, how do I channel this? Okay. Yeah, I mean, wow. When you were talking about going into the woods and, like, putting your hands in the soil and, like, that sort of thing, there's something so like, you can go into the woods and you can hike, and you can do a trail, and you can get to the end, and you can see things, and that's great, right? But you can also go into the woods and allow yourself to be led by curiosity and, right, not have a goal and allow what is taking place to emerge, right? And we see both of those ideals in nature, right? Nature is organized in a lot of ways and chaotic in a lot of ways, and that's what works. And I think, to your point about not having that in Christianity specifically, I think there's just no space for emergence, right? Like it's like here's how things are done. Here's what it looks like. Here's the rules that we follow, right? And I think there's so much life and so much beauty and progress that comes with emergence, like allowing space for something to come through rather than saying this is what should happen and how it should come through, you know? It's just
Yeah.
like that texture that you're talking about, the creativity, right? The generative aspect of the feminine is something that I feel is so important that we don't have right now in those spaces, I think. personally. you know?
Yeah, I think about this so much with um the early church fathers. Like you look at like Platonic thought and Iamblichus, and there's a really good book by Gregory Shaw called Hellenic Tantra. And I'm gonna say the word tantra, and everybody's gonna be like, "Is he talking about sex?" Like, no, it's not. It's not. Like, it's unfortunate because I have gotten to where I use the word so naturally from the
Yeah.
origin of what it is, but the zeitgeist of like where we're at, it's just like, which okay, I'm gonna say this, but like that's another thing that I feel like when you talk about deconstruction, I talk about this with my friend who I got him onto breath work, and he was a fundamentalist and has had tremendous breakthrough. Like me and him just being friends. Like he still goes to a church, but he talks about the insights that he's had through dreams and breath work and all of these things that he's started to do because he trusts me. He's like, "Yeah, I see your life." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna," and like we're like really close. And then he sees these like amazing breakthroughs in his life or these revelatory moments. And then he's like hit with these waves of kind of like, is this bad? Like Googling, like, is breath work demonic? And you're just like
Yeah.
kudos to the Puritans, man. They really sowed some seeds where it was like, if you're able to make people fear breathing, like,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, that is in, but it's not, and I don't wanna make light of it because it's not something, it is something that people legitimately will hit a wall. Like, a part of them has been trained or conditioned where if they hear certain words, they hear it. Like, quite frankly, it's like a lot of people would start hearing even the conversation we started with, like just a few of the phrases, and just immediately be like, no way, buddy. Like, stay away from me. Like, because there's such a fear, and there's such a wall, and there's such um like a legacy of demonization towards words, towards practices, towards actions. And I think that's what's, brings me back to theurgy, where it's like I look at some of these practices like um tantra, theurgic practices, like it rituals and ways that we don't just propositionally believe in God and sit in a church and say prayers one specific way that is built towards how we're thinking about it. But like what you're saying and what you were drawn to, where it's like I want my God to have fur. Like I want to feel, like I want to
Mhm.
like,
Yes.
and it's not a sky god that we have to only emotionally and propositionally connect to, but it's an embodied indwelling of like ways to in which the Catholics, they do have this, like, the theurgy, like liturgy, like they do the Eucharist, like that's part of it. But I know our tradition where we're coming from, they're like anti that too, So it's like that the version of which we came out of, I feel like it stripped away so many things and gave us like, here's the box in which you can participate. And it's like Corey Ashbury and like whoever other like I don't know, like yeah, like whatever. No diss towards music. It's like that's great, but yeah, I said a lot. So I'll throw it over to
No,
you.
totally, totally. Okay, so I definitely have thoughts about this, and, like, I also, as a woman, I want to, like, layer in just how what you're saying is, like, what I feel doubly true for women in the church. It's, like, that sort of separation of being like, "Oh, God's up here." It's like, yes, and also I don't look like God. My body, everything about me is not a man, right? And so there's this, like, extra thing of like, I have to like, God is not in me in the same way that God is in him, right? Like in the man next to me, whatever it is. So I think that's like worth talking about in some way. But what I wanted to say too was like, for people listening, like, do you want to just give an explanation of what Tantra really means and what it is? Because I feel like even when I was in Christianity, like I remember when I was sitting on the deck one day reading Harry Potter, and I knew that it was bad. You know what I mean? Like, quote unquote. Like I knew that we weren't supposed to be doing it, whatever. And I was just like, this is so ridiculous. It's a book. Like, why does this have such a hold on people? It's about a kid experiencing magic and overcoming evil, which is about like that is the plot line of Christianity. So like, what's our problem here? And I got so much slack for that, but just that I don't even know where I was going with this, to be honest with you, but in that, like, I also felt that thing of like, whoa, wait a second, like there is something to be said about discernment, right? And like testing things and finding what feels good, but also challenging these like constructions in our mind, like tarots of the devil. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. There's a lot. I like where we're going. I think there's a lot to unpack here. I think that this is something that I don't wanna get off on tangential, like, I don't wanna get lost as I'm talking about this because I think there's, like, 7 different things I could talk about. But I think, like, for Tantra, right? I'm not a, Tantra expert, so, like, I'm sure there's people that out there that will correct me and that will be able to say, even you. Um, from my understanding, tantric practices comes from, it's kinda like the Shiva Shakti, tradition, which that's the male female balance, and the Shakti is the energy of the earth, like the energy we put out. The Shiva is like that going back to that oneness and that consciousness. And so Tantra is kind of um, a expedited process in which we participate as humans in the practice of the embodiment of the gods, and it has like there's all sorts of different types of sadhanas and upanas that people do that they're able to sit and their own mantras and other things that they do to embody and to work with the deities. And I think it's the one interesting thing about um tantra is that there's coming from the Hindu tradition, the difference between like what the Vedics or a traditional Hindu belief system might be, especially in the sense of like Maya, which would be the illusion. And I think a lot of Christians kind of have this idea too, where there's like what we're seeing on this earth isn't real, that this is all just kind of fake. And eventually we're going to transcend into that spiritual place. The tantric tradition is a little different because their Maya is not necessarily that all of this is an illusion as much as it is there is Maya, which is like forgetting, where it's like you don't actually remember stuff from the past, but the body and the earth is very real and it's very much pivotal and a part of the experience of spirituality to where there's not this separation, which I think and this is a whole other rabbit trail that I don't think we're going to get into, but like within some of the spiritual traditions, or not spiritual traditions, but like the new age movement and some of the um you know this love and light teaching where everybody's all about getting out of the illusion of the body and getting into the light and going towards, it's like that can be problematic. And I think the reason is because you're missing a lot of the point as to why we're even here, which is why I love tantra, because it's like it has such a robust um understanding of that embodiment and of those rituals and of those practices, um which gets into discernment, which I'll talk more about, but I want to throw that back to you for a second before I jump into any type of that conversation.
yeah. Oh, I mean, I think you nailed it. I think it's the love and light thing is so funny to me because it just feels at its core like repackaged Christianity. It's just like, oh, just up and out. Like, forget about what's happening here now. Aim for, something higher, greater, above the suffering, above the pain, whatever it is. And I tend to think the exact opposite. So
Yeah,
it's
I
interesting.
mean 100%, and based on my experience with the stuff that I've seen, like even when I was in working at the outreach center and a part of the church and seeing some of the archetypal eruptions or the possession states and seeing some of the um I mean, you don't have to look far to see evil in the world, so it's like there's a reality in which trying to bypass that or to ignore it is just impossible. And
Mm,
and I think it's interesting. I want to touch on what you said about discernment because I think that is a huge that's huge. And I think a lot of people listening to this, if they do have a Christian background, they're going to be I think that is one of the number one things that people will sit and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to invite dark stuff into my life." And I think some of the things that we're talking about, you mentioned like we mentioned these words, and I think immediately it goes to, "Oh, that's probably dark, that's probably demonic, that's probably some kind of um entity that's going to lead me into some dark space, therefore it's easier to ignore it." But what I think is interesting about that is that it's not participatory, meaning like you start with the assumption of like not understanding something, immediately labeling it, and then just sitting in that fear, sitting in that space. And I think that in it of itself is worth asking a question, right? Like if you're not even able to question, is it really discernment or is it something else?
totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I don't even have anything to add. I just think like for myself, I remember feeling that like constriction around exploring things that had previously been deemed, demonic or dark or whatever it is. And I look now and I think like how interesting because, if things are judged by the fruit, I'm like, wow, like what a glorious bounty like I've received from, expanding my horizons and allowing myself to try things that, are considered demonic or dark or, the potential for something to happen. And I guess maybe I'm not the right person for that part of the conversation because I am starting to get curious about like duality and being like, what is evil? What does that even mean? Like we're meaning makers and storytellers as humans. And we love polarity so that we can see ourselves clearly. But like, what does it mean to have evil, outside I don't know. It's when you start to break it down, it gets really interesting. A little less gravid, but interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a big question, and I think that people approach it like we obviously approach it in different ways. But I will say the thought that I always have with a lot of this stuff is starting with your own shadow, like starting with your own awareness of realizing that you are capable of evil, realizing that evil exists in a way, or however you want to say it. There is a, and I'm not saying the shadow is evil because I think that's um how most people view it, whereas I think that there is a reality in which we do have the potential, but what I see the most is the people that are locked in of a belief system of like Christianity or um yeah, I mean being saved. There's there is a reality in which it doesn't really work that way, right? Because it's not like we're one thing that just gets saved. It's like the body has is layered. There's all sorts of things that are happening, right? And so you might get saved and you might have this like breakthrough where you feel, "Oh wow, like this feels really good. There's something in my life that feels new." Um but like does that mean you're a totally transformed person in every area of your life? It's like not necessarily. And so like life is a process of journeying into all the different avenues and parts of yourself. And so I think understanding is like, okay, we have the potential in all these different areas of having things in our life that we need to address and confront. Um, I think sometimes we fall into that trap of believing it's like if we do believe that this one thing has saved us and now we're like good and the rest is just kind of sin that we got to clean up and we don't hold it as like intricate valuable deep parts of ourselves that's not has nothing to do with sin but it's like it's who we are at our core that we dig into and we alchemize and we work with and we discover and we journey through and we allow those things to be transmuted, then it's like we get like a little touch of something that's profound, and all this stuff just stays in the shadow.
Totally.
And we don't believe that there's anything else that we're, I don't know. I think we just lost tools, is what I'm basically what I'm saying. It's like when I look back, it's like there seems to be a lack of language and tools to kind of keep digging in to that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's twofold. It's like, I think that there's a message that those parts of us are bad. Like we are fallen, we are unclean, we are sinners, right? Like all of that language divides us from ourselves. Like now we look back and we see these as vital parts of our being, right? Like vital parts necessary to embodiment. But
Yeah.
like in the process of being in Christianity, like the messaging is that we should be divided from ourselves, you know? And like our desire is bad, right? Like our all of it. Our body is sinful, right? It's going to lead us into bad things if we listen to our body. So it's not like surprising to me, I think that we get to this place and we're just ignoring all of those parts of us in order to be holy, right? Quote unquote. Um but yeah, and I think as far as tools go, like I don't know about you, but my experience with tools, like, I have a lot of trauma that I experienced in my life and then coming to a place that just says, "Oh, give it to God," right? Like, I don't know, I spent 24 hours a day in a prayer room praying, and, like, I think that was deeply beneficial to my spirit and my soul, and also, like, it did not help me resolve the trauma that I was carrying in my body, right? Like, shadow work or physical stuff, whatever it is, like, we don't have tools, we're not taught those things, in my
Yeah.
experience, you know?
That's what I look at a lot. And speaking of Tantra, it's like I was talking to a friend the other day, and within Tantra and within a lot of the Hindu tradition, you have the gurus and you have, and even indigenous people group, you have your shamans and whatnot. And I think one of the like really interesting things about those traditions is you have these gurus and these shamans that are deeply aware of not just the practice, but the embodiment that you're currently in, like the somatic, the spiritual, the emotional. Like when they're with someone, they're aware of that person, they're aware of what's happening. And a lot of times, there's very strict initiatory practices, there's ritual practices, there's things that you do and you don't do, and there's ways that you do it and you don't do it. And I think about that a lot because I think that's really important when you get into some of these things, because for a lot of people, there's certain practices that I think they need, but having someone skilled to sit with them and know what those things are um, is really challenging. And when I reflected my time with evangelical church, it was more like, yeah, you had people that were like disciplers, or however they would, like people that would be like, well, let me sit with you, but it usually felt very, very propositional, like very like, here's what the book says, here's what the scripture says, here's what the tradition, like here's what, it just felt different, and I will say it's like, and I don't, and I still haven't fully like been able to articulate and process just like why that's so different, but nevertheless, it's like I think that's something that the West has been stripped of tremendously, is those people that really know what's going on in those spaces.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing a resurgence of those people, honestly, at least in my experience. Is like, I think that what it feels like to me is like there is a shift away from organized religion and back to the land, right? Back to that interconnected, like beingness. And I think when you're in presence and when you're interconnected with people, that's when you get that, right? That's when you can see what's happening. When you become aware of what's in front of you and not what you think you should be seeing or how you think somebody should be like presenting themselves, right? And maybe that's like um, maybe my perspective is because I'm in those communities and I'm surrounded by those people, but I want to also believe it that there's
Yeah.
acts,
Well, it's
to
inevitable. It has to happen. I'm curious though, with you mentioned something earlier of like coming back to saving certain things from your past. I'm interested in what that looks like with this question of when we sit in these spaces. When I think about um theurgy or tantric practices or indigenous practices, I think about like you had traditions and ecologies of practices that were deeply connected to ritual and land and also history, like tradition. And I think about the stuff that gets created now, and I think the challenging thing is like, yeah, maybe we can find ritual, maybe we can find um, maybe we can find space, like the land, like find places, but but like the tradition is actually a little bit harder because like there's a fine line between the syncretic emergence of the new gods that are emerging and the appropriation or feeling like people are in or the love and light movement where people jump in and it's like here's somebody that wants to know something but maybe hasn't been initiated or doesn't actually know, like, so it's like there's these things where I feel like we're like kind of navigating this new land in a new way that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes people know what they're doing until they don't. Like I did a 5-MeO session and it was good, but it started to get crazy and I realized the people that were running it's like, I don't think they knew about some of the forces that were in the room. And
Mhm.
I was like, "Oh," so I'm thinking about that and then what you were saying earlier about what can I take from like, I
Totally.
guess my question would be what emerges? Like what does transform? Like what is it that and I'm not asking you to like solve the problem of like,
I
give us
can't
a
do that.
new religion, Taryn. Like tell us.
Yeah. Discernment. Okay. No, I think I understand your question. I think for me, in my experience was like I think what stayed was already there, right? And really the transformation comes by allowing an ending, allowing something to die and be reborn, right?
Yeah.
Like I was always in nature. I was always connected to storytelling. I was always listening to the wind, whatever that means, right? Like I always felt that magic. And so my process was allowing the structure, like I've always been more masculine energy. I've always hung out with the guys, like I wasn't raised with, women that allowed me that softness. Like I was never that. So it was much easier for me to feel um okay, I guess, in the structure of Christianity. For me, what the process was allowing that to fall apart and allowing myself to come to the unknown in the mystery and be okay with that, right? To be okay with the undoing rather than the knowing, the cognitive aspect. Um, and so I think that what has carried through for me are those land practices, right? Like being with the land, stewarding the land, allowing like what I now see as God to come through me into the land, into the space. Um, I'm very privileged in that my ancestry is not like far off as far as like my grandfather immigrated and so from Lebanon, and so I have connection to that culture and to that spirit, and I know enough about
Mm,
my mom's side to be able to look into, what were my ancestors doing now that I don't have, this religious structure that I'm bound to. I have the expansiveness to look into what I'm actually carrying in my body. I feel like we have this idea that we step into the body of Christ and we're now nothing but that. And like that's cool and everything, but like the reality is you carry hundreds of people in your body and your bones, and to think that we're separate from that is like it's it's quite ridiculous in my personal
Yeah.
opinion. So, I think, if anyone is looking at, like, what do I look for? How do I connect? Like, I would say go to your ancestry. See what people have been doing for thousands of years before Christianity rolled through, How did they connect to the land and the people around them? That's what I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah, yeah, and like starting ritual small, I think is another big thing of what practice can be done. Like I mentioned breath work with my buddy. I think that was like such a huge step for him because it was something that was almost like this doorway of I'm just breathing, you know? And the same with like parts work. You know, what's really cool about parts work is like you can spend time with this imaginal dialogue with yourself and encounter these things and you're like, well, it's like, yeah, you could be like, oh, this is bad, but it's like at the end of the day, it's like, what are you doing? You're sitting with yourself. Like at a certain point, like, I mean, how can that be like bad? Like, how can that be demonic? You know? And I think for a lot of people, it's like having those bridges and doorways into these types of practices and these, um, I don't know, these trees back to their roots is like really important because I think if not, there you just remain locked into like my only option is going to this place or worshiping this way or believing this way. I am curious as to you mentioned kind of the internal embodiment of how you felt then and how you felt now. Out of curiosity, how does the explicit Christ, like when I say explicit, I mean like the verbalization or the way that um, you think about, like, what does that look like? Like in your relationships, like if you hear somebody's like talking about, because I've met, for context, I've met friends that have deconstructed or walked away, and their stance is like if they'll hear people talk about religion, there's kind of a defensiveness of like, and it's like this weariness of like, I don't want to get back involved in that, or I don't really want to associate with it or be associated with it. I know for me personally, I've kind of went through that stage, but then kind of going back to this phase of like, I can't not have a relationship with the like the symbolic Christ, like the archetype of Christ, like that's in my bones and that's who I am. And there's a deep love there, and there will always be a deep love there. So to not have a practice or a worship of Christ, like it, it doesn't even make sense for me, you know.
Mm.
So I'm curious as to where you're at with your journey on that, how you relate to what I just asked.
Yeah. I mean, I would say currently it's quite spicy for me. I think just
Mm,
with the state of the world and America and whatnot, I feel, um yeah, the part of me that's, like, frustrated with what I experienced during my time in Christianity, that part is very present right now, where it's like, "Yeah,
mm,
this is why we're ending up in this place because of these things," Like, I feel I would say there's, like, an aspect of righteous rage, but then there's also this part of me that's just like, like, just so frustrated, that we're not seeing it, you know? I would say, like, in the same stroke, I see the value of religion, and I see yeah, the value of it. I see how it supports people and how people thrive in that place, and I love that for them. Like, I don't think I have any major issues with people, being in Christianity, especially people I love, I'm like, "Yeah, you're gonna figure it out." I think that's, like, the overarching thing for me, and kind of what's frustrating about having left Christianity for me is that I've always trusted people that they're gonna get where they're going. As long as they keep doing the thing, as long as they're seeking and asking questions, they're gonna get where they're going, whatever that looks like for them. And so I trust that my friends that are still in Christianity are gonna get there, whatever that looks like, If that's a life of being in Christianity, then that's what it is for them. But I don't feel like that's often reciprocated from the inside of Christianity out, of like, it feels more like once you stray, quote unquote, it's like, "Oh, you're cut off," kind of thing. Um, yeah, I think I definitely have that part that's frustrated is, wary as well. Like, I definitely feel like my body tighten and my shoulders come up when I hear people talking about Christianity as far as, like, evangelizing goes. I'm
Yeah,
like, "Oh,
yeah.
goodness gracious me."
I heard,
But
uh
yeah.
I was at a coffee shop the other day, and there was a group of young college kids, and, they sat down beside me, and I knew what was about to take place. Like, I just knew, like, I could feel it. I was like, "I've been into those groups," and I was like, "Okay, here it comes." And, they started off with, like, the praise and prayers or whatever you wanna call it, and it was like, "Yeah, I texted this girl and invited her, and she said yes, and I can really see God moving," and, like, it's like this thing where I had that visceral reaction too, where I was like, "Ah," like, like, "Oh, man, like, this just feels very strange." But then you get, like you realize, like, I would've been there, like, that's where I mean, I was there, like, I was in that space, and I get it, and, you have this thing of, like, wanting to be like, "Man, there's, like, so much that is out there to learn and to discover," but yeah, it can be challenging because I think that there's a whole world that exists outside of those frameworks, um, and I do sometimes feel like the language and the archetype, like, there's, like, a co-opted they've been co-opted in a way where I know me personally, like, I want them back, I'm not angry at the church, I'm not frustrated, um, but there is a reality in which, "Hey, this thing that you're claiming is not yours to claim."
100%,
Like like,
man.
you know?
Ye
And I think that is something that it really inspires my work and what I'm doing because it's like, I wanna say I do love Christ. But I don't want you to walk away with this sectarian view of like, "Oh, that means he's going to other and then flatten and, literalize." It's like, "No, no, no." Like, you said it earlier, like, the death and the resurrection, like, there's an archetype, there's a reality there that is, I think, transcendent of any localized interpretation of it, that is very powerful, that
yeah,
deserves to
I
live in these spaces that we're talking about, in these practices that we're talking about.
yeah, I mean, I could go on a whole thing about how Jesus is, like, the man, and I think we are, like, doing him a woeful injustice in the way that we see him today, but I think that's for another time. But I will say, like, you know, for me, like, I do feel it's like 2 things at once. Like, I trust the story, right? Like, I trust, like, you're talking about those kids. Like, yeah, I was that kid too. And, like, had I not lived my life in Christianity, I would not be the same person I am today, I don't think, or where I am today, right? Like, there's a purpose, and this is where I kind of step back from the, like, morality and judgment and, like, into the non-duality sort of thing where I'm like, "Okay, like, outside of what I think and believe about this, I see the bigger picture of people in their process getting where they're going," right? And I wanna honor that, and also, like, do I wish that purity culture in the church wasn't as destructive as it is for women. Like, yeah, 100%. Do I feel angry about that? Yeah, 100%. Like, I lived a lot of my life disconnected from my body because of what I was being taught. Right. So it's like it's a double edged thing happening there. But I think it's worth naming too. It's like, yeah, we want to give people the space to process through what they're processing and to live in accordance what they feel is presently true for them, and also, am I 100% okay with it? Probably not, right? You know?
Well, it's also voting. I mean, there's a huge political component that's become prevalent in today's society that now changes into a society in which we live in. And at the end of the day, like, this is the same story that's been happening since the early church fathers, where it's like, hey, we're voting for this thing based on the interpretation that we feel and that we have. And this is going to not only shape the church's community, but it's going to shape um, the structure of the polis. It's going to shape the environments we all live on, the access that women have to healthcare. Like, there's certain realities that, like, they do get shaped, and it's like, yeah, there's that component of, like, remaining spiritual and realizing it's like, alright, but then being hit with the reality, like, the political reality of things that also creates this, maybe a feeling of urgency. I don't know if it's fully warranted, as urgent as some people are making it, but at the same time, it is very real and very present, and I think that that is tension to hold, like, those 2 things, and to me, it says, "Okay, well, if I do believe that this is a archetypal situation, and this is a spiritual uh a spiritual process or an unfolding, then the embodiment of the things that we want to create is really important, you know. And I think that means like fearless embodiment, where it's like, hey, no, like, I don't know what that exactly looks like, but I think there's a grace there. I think there's a softness, there's a gentleness, but there's a directness too, that is called that creates these spaces and communicates it in a way that's like, hey, like, there are other options, there are other ways of doing things. And I think it's really important to vocalize that stuff of what you're saying, like that the tension you're feeling, because I think just vocalizing that in an honest way is really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I think these conversations in general, right? Like the honesty of like our experience and where we are now is that same thing, right? It's like there's exposure to something that is same, but different. Yeah.
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 Well, and I look at it as, even like, the thing that I always think about is the experiences of, we talk about, I like to use the term unattached burdens. It's a term from IFS, but Bob Falconer wrote a really good book called The Others Within, and he looks at all the different spiritual traditions and talks about uh, different types of spiritual entities and different types of psychological burdens that people become attached to. And to me, it really aligns with the phenomenology of what I've experienced in life, of seeing some of these things happen. And we've talked a lot about, like, the demonic fear, people having this fear of, like, these things. And as somebody that's actually worked with these entities, actually worked with this type of energy, that's actually, like, seen it firsthand hundreds of times, and worked within stuff within myself, and, like, really developed not just like a belief about something, but like a working model and an initiated, like, paradigm in which to move through. It's like you start to see how complex it really is, and how trying to simplify it into, like, saying this prayer and moving this and doing this, um, it's not as simple as people make it out to be. And I truly believe, and I know this is controversial, but I think that so many people that have this belief that, like, well, if I'm saved, I'm unaffected by certain things, or these energies don't affect me. It's like, it's such a lie. It's such a deception. And I think the real way that we protect ourselves from these things is um understanding what it is we're doing, and what it is we're connecting to, what it is we're participating in, what intention we're the intention we're going into it with, um, the um, the the initiatory practices, like, all of this stuff matters. And I think, like, the information's there. That's what's so crazy about it. But I think we've been sold this, like, package lie that's like, oh, you know, if you do this, then you're good. If you don't do this, then whatever.
What
And
do
we're
you
not opened up.
what do you mean by the information is there? I'm
So, like,
curious.
if like, you start looking into other spiritual traditions, and you see how other cultures have worked with different types of energies, how rituals have created containers, how people have been able to practice these things before Christ even existed, right? Like, if you go back to Native American, like, they had all the traditions, they had all the practices, like, they understood what was going on. And even before Jesus, like, they had people doing this stuff. So it's like, you have to ask the questions like, whose name were they doing it in, right? Like how were they doing it before like, and it's in the
Totally.
Bible. Like it's not like like it's like it talks about it right there. And so I think for me, it's like when I think about this conversation, I think it's even more relevant because I feel like, the work that we do psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, psycho-spiritual work, and you mentioned too, like the ancestors live in our bones. Like all of this stuff lives in us. Like so many things move through us. So many things are affecting our habits, our behaviors, our actions. And like, yeah, having a flattened propositional belief of Jesus, I don't think it always cuts it. It's
Mm,
like, and so for me, it's like, because Christ is a powerful archetype. I mean, I've seen it over and over. Like, I do think that's, I don't toss that out. I don't want to say that's not relevant or like I've tried to do it in the past, and that's just not the case, but it's not how it's talked about. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's multiple avenues of importance when we're doing this stuff of like, how do we create the container within to expand into these certain areas and not become overwhelmed by these archetypes and not become overwhelmed by um these things that we're doing. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Like,
yeah.
what does that make you think of when I
I
so
mean, the
long?
first thing that comes to mind is just like self-trust. Like the reason that we have this, again, my perspective, obviously, but the reason that when I came out of Christianity, I did not feel safe to test things was because I didn't have trust in myself because I had been taught to separate from myself, right? It was like, trust God, trust God, trust God. God will tell you, okay, cool. Well, when God's gone, then what? Right? Oh God, right? So it's like, how do we, inside or outside of Christianity? Like, again, no judgment, do your thing if you're inside Christianity. And how do you cultivate enough self trust to be able to discern, right? Like, if we're always giving our power away to someone else, something else, how do we actually embody anything? That's what comes to mind. It's like, it makes so much sense that people who are deconstructing and coming into the world are just like in freeze because they don't know how to process or engage with anything with self-confidence and self-trust, right? Blanket statement, but the experience I've had working with people. Um,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you.
yeah. I mean, I would say that's the biggest thing. Like, mostly women coming back into, deconstructing Christianity, coming into the world and being like, I don't know what to do, how to function, how to trust myself. How do I know if dating's okay? How do I know if reading these books is okay? To forget tarot or, Tantra. Like, how do I show up in the world and trust that I'm okay in my body as I am and am able to move through it, right? I think that's
Yeah.
one of the main reasons I've come to this work is like, how do we rebuild a foundation on which to move when our foundation was built on someone else for so long,
Yeah.
Especially, yeah, go ahead.
What are the tools that you find that are the most, I don't know, like, obviously, everybody's going to be different, so there's no one size fits all, but based on your experience, what are the things that you keep going back to or you keep finding like, "Oh, this seems to work," or better than other things, or something that you just personally gravitate towards or, like, feel comfortable or, feel more effective with when working with people to kinda get through the ambiguity of, like, or finding self, finding that core.
Yeah, I mean, I would say breath work is a huge one. I find that, starting small is like the biggest thing when coming out of trauma or coming out, trying to rebuild something is starting small. I think breath work is amazing with helping you come in contact with yourself, right? It's obviously only you're doing it. So that's a huge part of it. But previous to that, I would say just like small bits of somatic embodiment. Like, how do we just listen to our breath coming into our body and know that that's okay, right? Like, how do we hear our internal thoughts and know that that's okay, right? Good or bad, whatever we judge them as, like that non-judgment, just self-witness is like the foundation on which you can build things. Like when you start to build a relationship with yourself that is positive and compassionate, right? Instead of full of judgment and like stress about what you naturally do or think, like that is the starting place, I think, for all of it. And then you have all of these tools, right? Breath work, grounding, meditation, whatever it is for you. um Boundary setting, that would be another really big one. But yeah, I think just like the small bits of like building a compassionate relationship to yourself, that self-trust is the way to start.
What I mean, I'm imagining someone being in a position in which they're so entrenched, in a certain community or in a certain situation, or they're just in a position where they're like, or maybe they're not necessarily like practicing. Maybe they don't actually are still going to a community, but like just family ties of if I, presenting my belief system like this is really important just to maintain the peace in the family. How does a person hold on to that psychologically? Like these things you're talking about, it's like you're doing these small practices in the closet and then presenting this external, like, I'm sure a lot of people are doing this. I'm sure a lot of people are probably holding on to these things or these thoughts. But then when they're in conversations at Thanksgiving, it's like, oh, yeah, this, and this. And the presentation looks so different. What do you say to those people? Like, what do you like? What's the encouragement there? Like, what's the word?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say be patient with yourself. You don't have to rush, like, you don't have to rush, right? You don't have to make yourself uncomfortable. You don't have to cut ties right away, like, you don't or at all. Like, you don't have to do any of those things that you think that maybe you should be doing. Um, I know my personal journey, you know, deconstructing spanned probably, like, 5 years, of just, like, slowly but surely taking the time. And it wasn't until recently that I felt okay just being like, "No, I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't believe those things," you know? And that's I am confident enough in myself and what I do believe now that I feel okay with that, right? I think when we rush this idea of like, we have to if we're gonna deconstruct, we have to do these things. It's like, that's where you get overwhelmed and you just re-traumatize yourself, you know? You start to spiral. So I would just say, take your time, like, follow in your own work, follow your curiosity and your bliss and see where it takes you, right? And then allow yourself to use the coping mechanisms or strategies that you have. Like, we want to demonize coping strategies, and say like, "Oh, that's bad. You shouldn't be doing that or using that or whatever." And it's like, well, those actually serve a function for a specific amount of time, right? A strategic amount of time, and then we reevaluate and we switch course or whatever, right? But that would be, yeah, just take your time. There's no rush.
And do you have any practical advice as far as if a person's like they're like, I actually want to do tarot. I don't know. Or something where maybe they've done breath work, but that's easy, but like maybe I want to go see a medium. I don't know. Like what is the practical, I don't know, maybe you've had a memory or a way or a thought that whenever you are faced with something that you're like, oh, I'm not sure about this, something to tell yourself or ways of framing it to where it takes the edge off or it takes that like the intensity of what you're doing or shapes it in a way that maybe opens up access to it.
Yeah, twofold. So one, find somebody safe to be your buddy, you know, somebody you trust, take them with you, whatever. Um, and two, I guess like what I want to remind people is that like, obviously this is my belief, but this is what helped me get through it, is like, spirit is spirit is spirit. Right? Like when you're praying to God, and God can take different forms. right? So like we want to say like, oh, tarot is bad, it's the devil. It's like, okay, and maybe tarot is the same energy of God speaking through cards instead of through biblical passages, right? Like, what
Yeah.
if we can just expand our mind just a little bit to hold the what if, right?
Yeah. Especially when you're, I mean, just like for anybody listening, like the idea, I mean, if you think about it logically, I've met plenty of Christians that will flip the Bible open to a random page and then
Yeah.
look at it. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, what is that? Like, is that not a
Right.
form of tarot? Like, is that not the same? But yet that's like, oh, wow, yeah, that's okay. So at the
Right.
end of the day, I think we're all subtly doing these things that are represented in different types of, there's cards and images. It's like, okay, here's a symbolic production of archetypes. Like that's, there's nothing inherently good or bad about an image of a card, So I hear what you're saying. And I think if like highlighting, it's like people that are afraid of it have probably done similar stuff in different ways that they've just never correlated to. It's like, oh, it's actually the same thing.
100%. The same with movies, right? We're like, oh, God is speaking through Narnia. He's speaking through these archetypes and these stories. And it's like, yes, back to what you were saying about contracting, right? Like, it's the intention and the contract that we go into these experiences with. You can go into breath work and be doing it with God. Cool, right? Like, you can go into breath work and be connecting with the Holy Spirit. You can go into breath work and be connecting with whatever you want to be connecting with, right? Like, how do we do it with intentionality and the focus of what we want, right? Trusting that we can enter into something and not be open to whatever we don't want. The other thing I would say too is, if you're interested in doing something like tarot or breath work or whatever, one, find somebody that you feel comfortable doing it with, be it a friend. To find somebody who can help facilitate it with you that knows what they're doing and you feel safe with. But three, like there's so many small entry points. Like you don't have to dive straight into tarot. Go buy, an archetype deck or an animal deck or something that isn't as like edgy, right? Like there's other
Yeah.
ways that can, you don't have to go and do holotropic breath work to start. You can sit your floor in your bedroom and breathe deeply and intentionally into your belly for 2 minutes, like same. Doesn't have
Go
to
check
be.
out Breathe with Sandy, and I don't know if you've ever seen his videos, but he has a ton of online, they're very calming and, like, they're great. I do them all the time, but they're non-intense, and it's like, upbeat music and whatnot. Um, no, that's good, and to what you were saying, like, it just within the theurgic tradition, they talk about, the difference between the theurgist and the Gotia, which would be like a sorcerer, and it goes back to the intention, right? Because the sorcerer is the theurgist. Their intention is to connect with the divine, to embody the light of the divine, and to create space for that to come. And it's like a dissolution of the ego in order to make that space. Whereas like the Gotia or the sorcerer, um, maybe the Bruja, like and different cultures have different interpretations of that. So it's not as simple as that, but in like writ large, the intention of collecting power in order to use it for specific egoic means. It's like I want to do these certain things, and it's like that's a really easy thing to check. Like the intentions of like, oh, am I using this because I have this thing that I want to get, which is kind of funny. Because I'm going to be honest, like I know a lot of people that pray out of that spirit, right? Like they so it goes back to, like, getting rid of, like, the safety of the name and really forcing yourself to sit with what is and the intention of what you're doing. Because a lot of prayers can be sorcery. So it's like, even in what we're talking about, like, sitting with the intention of, "Am I doing this to connect and embody that light, or am I doing this to collect certain powers?" Or if other people that I'm talking to or that I'm around or that because I don't know if you've had this experience, but I know for me personally and anybody else that might get deeper into a different type of spiritual path, you're going to encounter different types of individuals that might, you might not know what their motive is.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, and maybe speak to that because I want to know how you've navigated that. I know how I, look at certain things and try to discern, to use that word, or try to like feel, but I'm curious as to uh what your process with that, or what your like how do you, it might be simple, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an ongoing conversation and adjustment, you know what I mean? Like there's I think when I learned to trust myself and embody myself and my body and inhabit myself, I became more clear about what things feel comfortable and aligned and what things don't feel comfortable and aligned. So I think that's one part of the answer. I think too, like I am in constant conversation with myself around, you know, am I uncomfortable with this because it's not aligned or am I uncomfortable with this because I've been conditioned to be uncomfortable with this, especially in the spiritual space, right? And I find myself very uncomfortable with some things now, interestingly, more towards like Christianity, right? Where it's like organized prayer. I'm just like, ooh, I have to like check in with myself and be like, am I uncomfortable with this because it reminds me of Christianity? Or am I uncomfortable with this because there's something actually happening in the space that I'm not comfortable with, right?
It's
So
a
I think
oh, we could do a podcast. Like we could do a whole nother episode on that.
yes.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the main thing, like, I wanna remind people is that, there's just just try the thing, do the thing. Trust yourself to know whether or not something's right for you in the moment. And if you find out afterwards that, like I mean, obviously, this is I'm not saying go do hard drugs or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's obviously a world in which this response lives.
Yeah.
But, like, trust yourself to try something new and know that when you try it, you're going to know one way or another because we're always learning and evolving, right? And when we sit behind this idea of like, oh, it has to be black or white, yes or no, whatever, like that's such a binary masculine thing and it doesn't create the space for the gray and the evolution and the emergence, right?
The
And
soul.
the growth we need.
Yeah.
Say that again.
The soul. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't create it, the life, life has no soul because it's like you're conditioned to, it's homogenous. It's like everything's got to look like certain one thing, which is just like I I have a buddy that is very smart, and he has a biblical studies degree, but he's so smart. And I think one of the really cool things I've noticed about him is like he'll look at some of the stuff that I'm doing and like have that immediate feeling of what you were saying, like, oh, I just feel like this is bad. But then he'll like think about it logically and like follow it back to a point where it's like it doesn't make sense anymore. Like for him, and he's able to because he knows enough of the scripture of being like, well, actually, they do say this in this verse, and this actually is a part of that. And so it's like for him, it's interesting to watch that unlock and be like, it's like I almost see him thinking his way into that ability to kind of try stuff. But I do know
totally.
for a lot of people, when you don't have a biblical study, like when you don't know enough to know, and then you ask questions, and then you're immediately hit with this, like what culture has told you, what the community has told you, all of those things. It is really hard to kind of think your way through some of that stuff and push into that level. Um, and I have a lot of like, I feel for a lot of people because I know that can be such a uh, an entrapment towards just so many things that are like, it's really not that bad over here. Like honestly, like
Yeah,
there's so much freedom, and that's
totally.
it's tough.
Yeah, I think coming back to that idea of like you don't have to rush either, right? Is like if something is uncomfortable for you, that's fine. Let it be uncomfortable. Maybe, don't run the other direction. Maybe stay in the zone and allow yourself
Mm,
to kind of that discomfort and, get curious about that discomfort, but you don't have to do the thing, right? Like, I didn't just suddenly jump into, like, pagan spirituality. It was, like, a long evolving process of following the things I was curious about, taking time to research, taking time to play, talking to people who do the things, right? Like, it doesn't have to be this, like, flip a switch and now you're different. It's like, no, you're gonna evolve and grow into these things, and those discomforts, you know, I believe that those things are actually, like, protective mechanisms of, like, maybe you're not ready to go that deep that fast, and that's okay,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Stay
Yeah.
in the zone, build your capacity to try new things and to be with new things, you know?
I wanna say with that, I think that is a great point, and I think that all of our psyches are able to handle a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of archetypal awareness of things, and without understanding what that limit is, you're 100% like, I think that's what most people are afraid of, but I will say that one of the things that I recommend to a lot of people that I work with and I do myself, I think this is where dreams can actually be very, very helpful. Because for me, I think dreams will give you a really good insight as to where the psyche's at. Because a lot of times the ego has a very limited view as to what especially if it's disconnected from certain parts of our bodies, it's very limited in what it actually is able to um, decide on or act from. Whereas, like, our dreams kind of give us this opportunity to receive other information from ourselves in ways that we didn't know that will, I believe, help us make certain decisions on what we can do and how we can do it. But with that, I think same with what you were saying, partnering with someone, helping people understand dreams, like people that can help you kind of walk through a dream symbolically. And I'm curious, is dream work, I mean, how much does dream work play into your practice or your like what you do with clients?
I wouldn't say I do a lot of it with my clients. Definitely something I'm growing into, taking some classes and stuff about that, which is exciting, but I don't feel I have all the tools yet to really, really hold that space with, like, the integrity that I feel like it needs. But personally speaking, like, even in Christianity, I was always writing down my dreams, always going through and filtering for, like, what I was, feeling and seeing and understanding. And I think something to remember with the dreams is that we do understand dreams through our lens, the lens that we're living in, right? So, like, when I was
Yeah.
in Christianity, my
Yeah.
lens was very Christian. And that's not to say it's bad, it's just to say, like, to what you're saying, partner with someone who can maybe help you expand that perspective just a little bit, somebody who has maybe a wider scope of practice in that area, to help you kind of see more than maybe what you would just see for yourself, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that is, I 100% like have the same experience because I remember I used to have a lot of precognitive dreams where I would dream stuff, and then I mean I still do. I have dreams all the time. Like one time I had a dream that my neighbor's house caught on fire. Next, I think 2 days later, his house caught on fire. I've had all sorts of dreams and I guess church would call them prophetic dreams. I remember it was so hard because every time I would have a dream, I would just assume that was like, oh, that's what it is. That's what dreams are. And it wasn't until I discovered Jung and I was able to open up a Jungian lens, which, AI controversial, but I have seen breakthrough for people of
Yeah.
plugging in dreams to a prompt of interpret and analyzing through a Jungian framework. I've got a whole Imaginal book that, if you're interested, you can check it out, and it gives you step by step on how to do this. And I think that shift of realizing that the dream figures that we see are not representations of the people in your life, but they're representations of the parts of yourself being used symbolically
Yes.
to show you how you're interacting. And I think having the basic like, even I think Jung is great for this because, like, that's his whole thing was he did a ton of work with dreams, and he offered a really good schema on how to sit with these things and with the shadow, the anima, the animus, and how our ego relates to all these things. And I think having that framework really allows someone to receive the medicine from the dream and the direction from the dream other than just interpreting it through the ego. Because a lot of times he says it's like, if your ego likes it, you might want to revisit the dream because most of the time our dreams will challenge the ego and be something that we didn't think. Um, and
Yeah.
even as simple as, like, people if you have a dream about having sex with someone, a lot of people feel shame about, like, "Oh, do I wanna have se am I like, do I secretly wanna have sex with that person?" It's like, no, like, it's symbolic of something else that is showing a relationship to maybe the feminine side of yourself or your relationship on how you connect, so to your point, it's like 100%, like, having and I think that's where when I said earlier, like, the tools, I feel like there's so many tools available through people that have thought about this stuff and journeyed into these spaces that have been blocked off by the church of like, well, don't mess with that. Don't look at that. Don't go there. And it's like, I would challenge people. It's like, if there's anything that people are saying, like, you shouldn't look at that, those are probably things you might want to like, there might be something really interesting there.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
good way to
And
figure out what you
important.
should be looking at.
Yeah. Yes. Important parts of ourselves to be in communication with for sure. Yeah.
But anyway, Taryn, this has been really, really fun. We'll have to do a
Yeah.
part 2, I think, and talk about all the stuff we didn't get to talk about today.
Yeah. Amazing.
But where can people find you and your stuff? You have a website, or do you have a book? Do you have any Substack? Like, where are you putting out stuff now, or or are you working with people currently?
Yeah, yes. Website definitely, tarenmaroun.com. I do one-on work with folks. I do, group immersions. Always doing something fun with horses and people too. So if you like horses, come find me. And then Instagram, I think would be probably the other place right now. Those are my two main spots. No book in the works. Hopefully, fingers crossed. You know what I mean? I know
Are you
you're
working
working
on
on
something?
always,
Yeah.
always. There's always a process happening there.
I was editing mine, and I had done about 50, almost 60 hours of a rewrite. And it was probably a month that I had been doing this. And one day I woke up, opened my computer, and it was just all gone. Completely back to,
What?
completely back to the where it was before those 50 hours, and I was like my heart stopped, and I was like, "Alright, I'm gonna put this on pause for now." Like, this was not what I was supposed to rewrite, so I'm gonna receive that and accept it, but so, yeah, I haven't worked on it since, but I was in talk with publishers trying to figure out, but I don't think the timing's right now, so we'll see.
Yeah. That's the hard part, right? It's just trusting the process and the things that are outside of our control when it comes to those things. It's like, okay, I trust it'll happen when it happens. Dang, I'm sorry to hear about all that stuff getting lost. So it's a
Well, it
moment.
was tough. The week it happened, it was so hard, but then now I think I've been able to sit with it in a way where I feel more optimistic of, like, that was if, there's a meaning, assigned a meaning to it, or I've assigned a purpose to that happening, and now it's easier because 'cause you're like, "I'm grateful for that because I don't wanna obviously write something that is not
Yeah.
what I need to be writing." So, almost like having that is a good thing, I guess, so but anyway, thank you again. This was really, really fun, and if anybody's listening that is going through these types of, uh, situations or questions or whatever, like, please, don't hesitate to reach out because I know that I was in a position where there's been many times where I've just wanted to talk to somebody or wanted to, like, work with somebody that could help, and I think there's a lot of benefit from that, so, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
100%. Shout out to the ladies too. Ladies, if you're deconstructing and you need somebody in your corner, hit me up.
Well, thank you so much, Taryn. Hey guys, before you go, if I could ask you one quick favor. If you enjoyed this video and you got something from it, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would like and maybe subscribe to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps. And in the meantime, if you're curious to check out more content like this, maybe check out this video or that video. Yeah, that's a good one. And don't forget to subscribe.